No longer human. Ōba Yōzō, a young boy from a privileged family, struggled to understand and fit into the world around him. From an early age, he sensed an overwhelming difference between himself and others, leading to a deep sense of alienation. To cope with his fear of not being accepted, Yōzō developed a facade of clownish behavior, using humor and foolishness to mask his true feelings. This act of self-defense became a way of life for him, but it also deepened his sense of isolation, as he could never reveal his true self to anyone. As he grew older, the gap between his internal world and the external expectations widened. Yōzō's inability to connect with others in a meaningful way led him to question his humanity. He felt like an imposter, constantly afraid that his true nature would be discovered. This fear haunted him, creating a life filled with anxiety and self-doubt. In his late teens, Yōzō began to engage in self-destructive behaviors, seeking refuge in alcohol and shallow relationships. He moved to Tokyo, hoping to escape the suffocating expectations of his family and society. However, his new environment only exacerbated his feelings of alienation. He found himself surrounded by people who seemed equally lost, but Yōzō's despair was uniquely profound. His relationships with women were particularly troubled. Yōzō viewed them as a means to escape his internal torment, but each relationship ended in disaster, leaving him more broken than before. He was plagued by guilt and shame, feeling that he had used these women without ever being able to love them truly. His inability to connect emotionally with others drove him further into despair, and his reliance on alcohol became a crutch he could no longer do without. Yōzō's life continued to spiral out of control as he became involved with a group of disillusioned artists and writers. These individuals, like Yōzō, were disenchanted with society, but their camaraderie provided no comfort to him. Instead of finding a sense of belonging, Yōzō felt even more isolated, as his inner turmoil was something they could not understand. His involvement in this bohemian lifestyle only led to further disillusionment. He began to question the very essence of his existence, wondering if he was even capable of being human. His sense of identity unraveled as he realized that he had no sense of self outside of the masks he wore. This existential crisis pushed him closer to the brink of madness, as he grappled with the idea that his life might be completely meaningless. The collapse of Yōzō's mental and physical health was inevitable. His drinking worsened, and he became increasingly dependent on others to support his deteriorating state. His once sharp mind was dulled by alcohol, and he found himself unable to create art or write, the very activities that once gave his life meaning. Yōzō's despair reached its peak when he attempted suicide, a desperate act born out of the realization that he could no longer endure his existence. However, even in this, Yōzō failed. His cowardice prevented him from following through, leaving him alive but more desolate than ever. The failure of his suicide attempt only deepened his self-loathing, and he resigned himself to a life of misery. Those around him began to abandon him, seeing him as beyond redemption. In the final chapter of Yōzō's life, he accepts his fate as a man who is no longer human. His sense of self is completely eroded, and he becomes a mere shell of the person he once was. Yōzō's story ends in a bleak resignation, as he comes to terms with the fact that he can never be a part of the world he once sought to escape. His humanity, if it ever existed, is lost forever. Yōzō's tale is a harrowing exploration of the human condition, highlighting the fragility of the mind and the devastating effects of alienation and isolation. His life, marked by a constant struggle to find meaning and connection, ultimately ends in tragedy, as he succumbs to the darkness that has always haunted him.